originally started writing it in Lawrence's creative nonfiction class last semester, and it was like a response piece to something we wrote. And I responded to Kathy Acker's humility, and she uses the word cunt in it. But Kathy Acker is famous for using this technique called the cut-up technique, where you take words and cut them up and rearrange them that have already been published and make them into a new text. So I want you guys to do a variation on that, if you wouldn't mind. In these shot glasses that Uptown has nicely provided, there are lots of cunts, and there are stanzas of one of my grapefruit poems on your tables. And I would love for you to infuse more cunt into this poem. So please do that as your heart desires. Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started now, if that's okay. Does this sound better to everyone? Cool? Okay. Cool cunts. I have been thinking a lot about the word cunt lately. The way it rolls so sweetly off my tongue. The way it does not make me think of grotesque things. The way it makes me think of my vulva, its lips, curves, clitoris. The way I like to use the word, think the word, to refer to my anatomy. I am sitting in a coffee shop rereading punk poet Kathy Acker's Humility. It feels cool to read the word cunt in public, even to myself, resisting the vibe, conformity. I am drinking tea. By now it is cool. Cool enough to wish I had a cup of ice to pour it over, but I don't. So I drink it like it is, out of a coffee cup meant to be warm. And I reread the word cunt a few times as I sip on Earl Grey. Cunt lips, cunt lips, cunt lips. And I feel cool because I am young enough to feel subversive for thinking the word. Acker's writing co-ops the cut-up technique popularized by Burroughs, cutting up texts and rearranging them, creating new work, controversial. Some call it plagiarism. Her essay, Humility, explores her use of this technique and criticisms of it through the protagonist, Capital. Capital reflects Acker. Capital makes dolls. One doll, Ryder doll, is accused of plagiarism. Punk is not afraid of cunt either. In some cases, redefining the meaning of the word, while in others, simply spilling it out in rage. The queers just say cunt forever emboldened a 21st century generation of punks to call their cunts cunts. As an adult, I found punk past the age of life consumption. Barely, maybe. But the way the genre has embraced the cunt makes me admire the subversive thrashing, vocals, drums. The way the lyrics promise me it's okay to say cunt, that it's the best thing to say, the best thing to call my vagina, vulva, clit. I have some poems about citrus, grapefruits and vaginas, vulvas, my vulva, a growing collection. But in these poems, I have not used the word cunt. Maybe because I am still scared of writing it down, forever naming my citrus anatomy cunt, because the world has called it dirty. I am in love with the word cunt, more and more as I ruminate. The texture of the hard C, oral consonant originating against soft palate, pushed through back of tongue. The tip of my tongue's blade, slick behind teeth to create hard T, oral stop. Enunciate the word slowly to myself, over and over, casually. Writer doll is told that they have plagiarized. Feminist publisher doll tells writer doll to apologize. But capital controls the narrative. No apologies. Writer doll is told. Feminist publisher replied that she knew writer was actually a nice, sweet girl. Acker subverts the ideas of sweetness, niceness, through capital, through writer doll, through refusal to say sorry, through the cunt. Kathy Acker uses the word cunt exactly one time in Humility. Capital made a doll who looked exactly like herself. If you pressed a button on one of the doll's cunt lips, the doll said, "I am a good girl and do exactly as I am told to do." Capital does not do as they are told. The cunt lips are lying, and through their lying, Acker is empowering the cunt, its lips, and the language of the cunt, the way it rolls off my tongue. That one cunt feels so good to read to myself, mouth to myself, maybe whisper between sips of cool tea to myself. Think of my own cunt, the work that it does for my body, balancing, restoring, renewing. Think of how it is not so rebellious to call my cunt a cunt. Think of my poems about citrus, vulva. Think how they need cunt. Cut out cunt from Acker's essay, place it in my poems over text. See how it looks inside my poetry. Like it. At some point, I tell a friend about the word cunt, about the way I call my vulva my cunt, over tea. We have a short conversation among coffee shop stir, rejecting cunt as a dirty word. We call our cunts cunts. Agree the word should not be a slur. Agree not to use it as one. Promise. Still don't use it in normal conversation. We are young. At other points, Acker refers more directly to her own cunt and her protagonist cunts, coming to orgasm through her cunt, writing while engaged in masturbation of her cunt. I am fascinated with the way Acker uses the word, so casual, a casual cunt. I am young. And the way she uses it feels like rebellion to me. The best kind of rebellion, subversion, because it does not call itself rebellion at all. I tell a mentor, teacher, writer friend that the word cunt feels so cool to me. We have a conversation in a vegan restaurant about it. Subversive meat refusal. We use the word casually, and I can't help but lean in. Whisper to him, "Doesn't it feel so cool to say it in public?" Normal conversation, without hesitation. He is older than me. Chuckles, agrees. I don't look around, see if anyone is noticing. Think about the way we could live in a world where cunt is normal, anatomical, casual. Think of how I want to live in that world. Think about my poems, the way they need cunt. I look at my poems again, change just a few lines, 2. When I cut the fruit in half, stare at its insides, it reminds me of my cunt, hidden, caressed. And in another poem, stare at the curves, watch them fold into each other, trace membrane with thumb, think of the tenderness of the cunt. Reread the poems, appreciate the way it lingers but does not hesitate, subversive the way it slips by, rebellious in the way it fits in, casually normal. I like it. It feels cool, like pink citrus on my tongue. I read the poems again, sink into the words, linger on small revisions, cunt. I feel cool. Thanks, guys. Okay, so I currently have 5 grapefruit poems, and this is the only one that I haven't read in public. So here it is. Eating grapefruits, age 22. Think of the rind-encased flesh, bruised pressure on exocarp, the way that it bleeds. The fruit mimics my cunt when I dig my nails into the flesh, peel away at tender, darkened exocarp in 2 exploded carpals, press nails against lucid wall, break skin and stare, watch fluids release through incision. Think of menstruation. Press 2 fingers against the lips of my cunt beneath panties. Feel warmth of skin, body, fluids. Remove fingers and see. Thick blood. Insides pour out. Release of egg. Cleansing uterus, cervix. Watch grapefruit bleed. Fluids erupt onto soft skin beneath fingernails. Carry grapefruit to faucet, wash hands, run cool water over bleeding flesh. Press tongue into torn shape. Thanks. So this is called Cutting Carnations, and it's a creative response to a book that we read in readings class this semester called People of Paper. Cutting Carnations. Drive past the flower fields every morning, rural land, amidst suburban sprawl, outskirts of West Valley, Southwest. Watch the men cutting flowers with blades kept at their hip, move in one smooth motion, like they are dancing with flowers, carnations, bursting green, explosive blooms of cherry red, magenta, pinks of summer. The men take care of them, care for them. They made love in the fields, felt crushed buds, blooms against tenderest skin, fed new roots, seeds below dirt, with sweat from the movement of their hips. When they are done, she will find petals in her hair, pick them out with slender fingers. She will not wash the dirt under her nails. We have been walking for a while, holding hands. We are near the sea, not near enough to see it, but there is a breeze. If you pick the wildflowers, or maybe step into carnation fields, grab flower by hip, and work out petals with fingertips, do not uproot whole plant, just a few petals. Rub them against thumb and forefinger before pressing against tongue. Feel smooth petal against taste bud, bite and taste, salty moisture on tongue, taste ocean. The last time they make love, it will be in the fields. They stop going, avoid the textured ridges of petal edges, carnation. Find new ways of walking. long for the texture of stem and soil impressed on skin. On new roots, find flower stalls, roses, dangerous bud, buy one, every day. Press thorns into thigh, apply pressure, leave flesh dotted liquid red. Do I have time for one more? What time did I start at? Go. Okay. This is a poem. It's called He Loves My Tattoos. I know you don't want to talk to me, he says, stepping toward me, blocking exit. I'm trying to leave, it is late. But I just had to tell you, tilts head toward my ear, 1 a.m., noisy bar, chaos of alcohol, and he needs me to hear. It is early May, and it is late, later than normal, celebration of summer's first days, of sitting with friends, laughing. But Hillary asks if I'm ready to go. I say yes, grab things and walk toward exit. That's when he stops me, says he has to tell me how much he loves my tattoos. Look at him and say, you're right, I don't want to talk to you. Step aside around frame of his body, goosebumps from spring's leftover chill disappeared against breathy heat of bar, appear again, cold air. Thanks, everyone.
What's up? So my two biggest fears are spiders and raccoons. My third is following up Katie. So this is a big moment for me of confronting those fears. Much like Katie, I'm going to be reading from my thesis. It is interesting and dark and violent, so I'm sure Jesse will love it. So I'll just go ahead and get started. The long, rolling, lonely hills of dead grass seemed to stretch far into the distance like barren undulations that forgot to grow green. Brush and stunted trees wilted under the sun through drought after drought, burning in July and crackling in December. As far as the eye stretched, the land was the brown of nature's death. The only beauty, it seemed, was the great purple and burnt orange of the sun as it peeked through thin clouds of dusk and of dawn. Small towns dotted horizons that stretched without end. Gas stations bordered the highway, and cars and trucks that seemed beyond the point of repair rested in empty lawns where children used to play. Thin brown creeks and streams cut rivulets that crossed county lines, and water moccasins and herons made these their home. In the summer, cicadas sang and competed with the hordes of grasshoppers for who could sing the loudest. And as the countryside sang into a snowless winter each year, one that lasted only from November until February, and speckled with days of sunshine and a humid warmth, the leaves fell from the trees and barren branches clacked together. In the midst of it all was the small town where people picked their way through life in search of a way to pay their bills, to drink away their days, and celebrate what they could of a sometimes harsh life. There were great homesteads with expansive houses and tractors and guns bought for show and cars bought for speed, and there were small homes that used to could have been little more than shanties. It was those people that carved their way through day after day and month after month. They made moonshine with old recipes, and they drank Lone Star on their porches under the stars late into the night. They were simple and grand people, and they were loved by each other for their honesty. And yet they were also a violent people when need be, and it was this that made them real and true. Clay never had the chance for final words. Instead, in the moments before the first bullet went through his throat and sank into the wall of cigarettes behind him, he was humming the melody to Jolene, his mother's favorite song. The sound of the door opening didn't stir him from the reverie of rolling a cigarette. He didn't raise his head at the sound of heavy boots on tile. His fingers didn't stop working as the steps moved closer. He didn't look up from the rolling paper and the loose bugler tobacco. All he thought to himself was that it was the prettiest song in the whole world. It was his favorite lullaby. When I have a kid, he thought to himself in those last moments, I'll sing that song while I rock him to sleep. First, I got to find myself a wife, he thought. Maybe Amanda, he thought. Maybe Amanda. The last sentence that ever crossed his mind, the final punctuation in a short life. Then the gun fired and the bullet went through him and blood sprayed. He didn't think as he fell to the ground, already bleeding to death. He didn't think a thing as his eyes went blank and lost, and the figure above him, a dark shadow because of the white fluorescent light bulb above it, took a hammer and brought it down onto the still skull of Clay Haley. Bobby was the first one who saw what happened. He came in for the morning shift to relieve Clay, and he knew right away that something was wrong. The lights were out, and the door was open. Clay was a drunk and came in stoned all the time, but he never let big things like that slide. He liked his job well enough, and something like leaving the door open to let in the mosquitoes at night and the wasps during the day wasn't like him. When Bobby walked into the store, he didn't see anyone at the counter. Cans of beans and fruit cups were smashed on the floor, and 2 packs of toilet paper were scattered in one of the 10-foot aisles. He went to the bathroom and looked inside, but Clay wasn't there. He finally walked to the counter and looked at the wall of cigarettes. The Newports and the Marlboros above them were splattered red, and half were blown to shit. Jesus Christ, Bobby said, and he looked over the edge of the counter. There was a pool of red, not like the purple of blood just before it is spilt, but like stale blood that stains tile if you leave it too long. Bobby moved around the counter and found Clay on the floor with coins spilled all around him. The register was open, and the contents on the ground were spilled on the floor, and Clay's bloody hand was still gripping the till. His throat had a wide hole from where a slug had passed through it, and his body was full of buckshot and small open wounds. Someone had taken the butt of the shotgun, or maybe a hammer, he figured, and smashed in Clay's face. It was a purple open wound. Bobby leaned away and puked, and that's about when Alice first showed up. So this skips ahead a little bit, but it's cool. So I'll drink to that. May knew he would come. They always did. All her life, she had waited for the arrival of the white cruiser and its lights as they came up the dirt road. She didn't know much else. She did know, though, that every time she saw that cruiser or those lights, it was one day closer to the one she always feared. When she saw Woods drive up to her property, she wasn't afraid. Instead, she was resigned. She knew that disaster was one wrong roll of the dice away, always, and in her heart she felt as if the dice had always been weighted against her. It had first been a father, then brothers, then a husband. When she carried her first child, she knew it would be a boy. Then came another, and she knew that odds were a devil's game made to worry her until her thin blonde hair fell out strand by strand. As Woods got out of his car and slowly walked towards the house, she wondered whether or not he would knock or whether he would smoke a cigarette on the front porch for a while, thinking about how he would tell her that one or both of her sons was dead or that they'd done something wrong. A disappearance of 2 days wasn't much to her. She'd seen it plenty, and the fact of her 2 sons disappearing for a while was nothing to be shocked or in awe of. The presence of a sheriff wasn't surprising either. But a boy was dead and her sons were gone, and she knew that the visit was about them one way or another. May didn't wait for him to knock. Instead, she dried her hands from washing dishes and walked directly to the door. When she opened it, Wood seemed skittish. He moved away from the door and dropped his cigarette, where he let it rest in all its ember-born fury before extinguishing it with the toe of his boot. "Come in when you're ready. I'd rather you just get it done with," she said. Woods nodded and followed her into the house. The place was both cluttered and clean. There were too many framed pictures on the wall, but they were all hung balanced and equally. The glass was clean and translucent, and you could tell she dusted the frames. The couch was old and the material was fraying, but it retained its comfort, he could tell. In the kitchen, the dishes were drying and the house smelled of bleach. She cleaned to fill the time, a habit from when she was getting off of Oxy a few years back. May led him to the kitchen and poured 2 cups of coffee. They sat down at the wooden dining table and lit cigarettes. An old jelly tray was in the middle of the table, and they used it as an ashtray. "Do you know why I'm here, ma'am?" "I've known you for 20 years, Zach. Just call me May," she said. "May it is," he said. "I have an idea why you're here, why you think you're here." "And why's that?" "You think my boys killed Clay and knocked over that place." May said it quietly and without emotion. She herself understood why Woods was in her home. She would have done the exact same thing. But it didn't matter to May Cole. Her sons might not have come home in a while, and the whole town may have looked at her with disgust, but none of that was new. She'd bought a ticket for the life she had, and she had a dignity inside of her that would never have allowed for regret. "I don't know whether they did or not. I'm just trying to talk to them." "Well, they ain't here," she said. Woods nodded. "So I figured. Any idea where they are?" "Ain't you supposed to know that?" She dug deep into the long vowel as if extending a finger. May watched the corner of his mouth twitch. She knew he didn't want to be there. He'd spent too much time at the dining table with her, inquiring about one thing or another. Normally it wasn't about the boys, though, and she knew that was the reason he was so quiet. "May, I'm not here to arrest your boys. In fact, I hope they were here so I could cross them off the list." "What list?" "Of people I got to talk to about this whole thing." "And why do you have to talk to my boys?" "You know why." "Just 'cause there's a tree full of apples don't mean they all taste the same, Zach." She leaned over the table, sipping at her coffee. When she sat the cup back down on the table, she started to twist her wedding ring. Woods found himself not able to speak. He knew just how much May had seen and done and been done to her. The fact she kept wearing the ring was a mystery to some, but not to him. Women like May Cole didn't turn their backs on anything, especially when the law was what wanted her to turn. "May, I'm just trying to talk to them," he said. "They ain't their daddy," she said again. "I don't think they're like their daddy. I just need to ask them some questions." May stood up and moved to the sink. She looked out the window at the broken-down truck and the lawn and the stack of firewood piled against the shed, its paint peeling like just about everything she owned. "You know I can't help you, Zach," she said. "Couldn't even if I did know where they were. I figured, but I thought I might stop in at least and see if they were here. They ain't." Woods nodded and stood up. "I'm guessing you haven't seen them since all this started." "You know the answer to that question." "I guess I do," he said. Woods stood up and finished his coffee. "Thank you for your time, May. I'll be leaving now." He moved towards the door, taking his keys from his pocket. "Zach?" She was looking at him, and he noticed that she had wrinkles around her eyes. It was the first time she had ever seemed like she was aging, like she wasn't always going to stay the strong young woman that tamed a beast only to realize it was too wild to ever keep penned. "Yes?" "If you find them, try to bring them in. They ain't their daddy," she said once more. "I will." "And Zach?" "Yes, ma'am. It wasn't them, just so's you know." Woods stopped and turned to look at May. She was still calm, holding loose to her coffee cup, as if she was resting on the weight of the porcelain. "How you know that?" "Because there's only one man who could do that to a boy like Clay Haley." "And who's that, May?" "My husband." Randall didn't smoke, but Bobby did, and while he sat by the card table in the trailer's kitchen, he pulled a cigarette from Bobby's discarded pack and lit it with a match he'd found next to the ashtray. The body was in the middle of the living room, splayed out in a puddle of blood that seemed too big to come from one man. After the things he had seen, there was nothing about the body of Bobby Blue that could torment him. Instead, he looked at the body with a curious uncertainty. He'd never seen anything like it, not in years of bad luck and bad memories. The county coroner was waiting outside. Randall had told him to stay there until Woods showed up. There was yellow tape around the house, and already people were starting to gather around. When Randall peeked through the tattered curtains, he could see Melvin waiting with his notebook in hand. Then Woods pulled up and slowly moved towards the house, passing the growing crowd and ducking under the yellow tape at the edge of the yard. Woods walked into the house and saw Randall at the kitchen table smoking. He avoided looking down at the body, not sure what he would see. "Didn't know you smoked," he said. Randall shrugged. Seemed like a good time to give it another try. They met eyes for a while, and then Randall stood up and moved towards the body. "I've seen shit before, but I ain't seen this type of shit," Randall said. Woods looked down and saw what Randall meant. Bobby had never been a looker, but he certainly wouldn't be in the casket. His forehead was crushed in, much like Clay Haley's, but the mutilation was worse. His face was covered in cuts, and someone had removed his nose and his lips. The eyes were purple and bulging as if he'd been choked. They were the only thing you could make out from his face. When Woods moved closer and saw Bobby's open mouth, he realized that someone had cut the tongue out. It was a butchering, one where little care had been taken. Whoever had done it wanted people to see what could be done to a human body. "Jesus H. Christ," Woods said. "He's got about 10 stab wounds. Throat slit, too." "Figure it's the same sick motherfucker," Woods said. "I figure the same. Hammer, something to the forehead." They both lit cigarettes. Woods wished he'd brought a little bourbon with him. The body didn't smell yet, but the blood that covered the floor was thick and dark. "I guess we should bring the coroner in here to start taking care of it," Randall said. "County sent over crime scene, too." "More than Melvin's going to write about this one," Woods said. "It'll get out what's been done." "That's what I figured." They sat in silence until Woods finally went to the door. Randall didn't hear what was said, but he figured they were finally calling everyone in. He stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray and put his hat back on. He nervously played with the handle of his pistol and leaned against a wall as he watched them move in to take pictures and handle the body. The first coroner looked down, then his eyes shifted quickly to Woods and Randall. His face had gone pale, and there was a tinge of green to the skin. "The fuck happened, Woods?" "I was hoping you could help me out with that question." They moved in, and after blanching briefly, started to take pictures. They had all seen death, and they'd all seen Clay Haley, but none of them had ever seen such a total mutilation of a human body. One of them moved closer to Randall, lowering his camera. This thing here, is it worse than what you saw in another town? Much. While Woods talked to them and watched over their handling of the crime scene, Randall walked outside. The crowd couldn't have been more than 15 people, but in a small town, that was enough. They fell silent while they watched him approach. He walked straight to Melvin. So what is it, Randall? He cleared his throat. Bobby's dead. We don't have any leads, but we will soon. Randall walked towards his truck. Woods came out of the house and jogged over to him. Where are you going? There never was a death certificate for Sam Cole, was there? Woods stood looking at Randall for a while, considering his face and the way that Randall kept running his finger over the grip of his gun. No, we never found the body. And what'd May Cole say about the whole thing? Did you see your boys? Randall asked. No, can't say I did, Woods said. Then I think I need to talk to May Cole. We need to stay here, make sure it goes all right. No, Randall said, one of us does. You've already talked to May Cole. I think I'll go see her myself. You don't really know her, Randall. I'll know her soon enough. Randall got in the truck and slammed the door. Woods put his hand on the truck and leaned towards the rolled-down window. Don't do anything too stupid. This ain't something you can handle real quick or something. You got it, Randall said and drove away. The crowd was watching. Woods looked out as the truck peeled away down the road and turned to find Melvin at his side. Where's Randall heading to? Woods looked at the old man. He had bloodshot eyes and the first few liver spots on his hand. He was a heavy smoker like Woods and took a cigarette from the sheriff. Woods took one out himself and they both smoked for a while in silence. Can't say I know, Woods finally said. Same murder? Woods said nothing but looked at Melvin for a while. They sized each other up and Melvin finally looked to the crowd. They're starting to get afraid, Melvin said. So am I, Woods replied. He nodded at Melvin and moved back to the house. The flashes of cameras from inside were abrupt. The porch creaked as he walked inside, and he finally smelled the body. Thank you.